Montana Territory, 1880. The wide-open sky stretched endless above Miles Porter as he stared at the weathered sign swinging from a post at the edge of the neglected property. Elkhorn Ranch. It read in faded letters, the wood split from years of harsh winters and baking summers. Behind it sprawled a vast tract of land, his land now, supposedly, punctuated by a two-story ranch house in the distance, its windows dark as vacant eyes. Miles dismounted his dun gelding, stretching his back after days in the saddle. At 25, he was no stranger to hard riding, but the journey from Wyoming had taken its toll. His clean-shaven jaw clenched as he surveyed what his mysterious uncle had bequeathed him. Uncle Jeremiah, a man he'd never met, brother to the father who died when Miles was just 13. Not much of an inheritance, he muttered, pushing back his worn Stetson. The barn leaned precariously, fence posts had toppled like drunkards, and the corrals stood empty of the cattle that should have filled them. Miles had spent the past 7 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never setting down roots. The frontier was no place for attachments. He'd learned that watching his mother wither away from grief after his father's death. Loving something meant losing it, plain and simple. Better to keep moving, stay alone, take what work came his way. A man couldn't get hurt if he had nothing to lose. The lawyer's letter had caught up with him in Cheyenne, property in Silver Creek, Montana Territory, left to you by your late uncle. Considerable acreage. Ranch house intact. Must claim in person within 30 days. No explanation of why a man he'd never met would leave him anything at all. Miles led his horse toward the house, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The windows reflected the afternoon sun, hiding whatever waited inside. Something about the place made his neck prickle. 7 years of drifting had taught him to trust that feeling. "What secrets are you hiding?" he asked the silent building. The wind whispered through the tall grass, offering no answers. Little did he know, behind those walls, someone was watching. Hope Blackburn's heart pounded as she peered through the curtains at the tall stranger approaching the house. 20 years old with honey-blonde hair falling in waves past her shoulders, she pressed a trembling hand to the high collar of her blue calico dress. She'd been alone on the ranch for 3 weeks since old Jeremiah Porter passed, staying hidden as he had instructed. "When I'm gone," he'd wheezed from his deathbed, "you stay out of sight until my nephew comes. Miles is a good man, but cautious. Let him find you in his own time." She hadn't expected his own time to arrive so soon. Jeremiah had spoken of his nephew with such fondness that she'd imagined an older man, not this young, broad-shouldered cowboy with eyes the color of a storm-darkened sky. The floorboards creaked beneath her as she backed away from the window. Jeremiah had taken her in 2 years ago when she'd fled Billings with nothing but the clothes on her back, a 16-page journal of botanical drawings, and her father's silver pocket watch. The old man had given her shelter, purpose, and safety when she'd needed it most. In return, she'd kept his house, cooked his meals, and learned every herb and plant on his land. But now Jeremiah was gone, and this stranger, his legal heir, could send her packing with a word. Hope retreated to the kitchen at the rear of the house. The soup she'd started that morning simmered on the stove, filling the room with the aroma of wild onions and rabbit. She hadn't expected company, but there was plenty to share. If this was to be her last meal at Elkhorn Ranch, at least she'd leave with her dignity intact. The sound of boots on the porch made her freeze. Miles approached the house cautiously. Something wasn't right. The place looked abandoned at first glance, but subtle signs suggested otherwise. A neatly swept porch, the faint scent of wood smoke from the chimney, a clothesline with nothing on it, but clearly recently used. Someone was here. His hand drifted to the Colt strapped to his hip. 7 years on the frontier had taught him caution. Outlaws, claim jumpers, squatters, any could be waiting inside. The front door was unlocked, swinging open at his touch. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but surprisingly clean. No dust covered the simple furniture. A clock ticked on the mantel, and from somewhere deeper in the house came the unmistakable smell of cooking food. "Hello," he called, hand still near his pistol. "Anyone here?" Silence answered him, but Miles could feel eyes on him. He moved through the front room toward the hallway, alert for any movement, when a floorboard creaked behind him. Miles whirled, drawing his pistol in one smooth motion. A young woman stood in the doorway to what appeared to be the kitchen, her hands raised slightly, eyes wide. Sunlight from a side window caught her honey-blonde hair, turning it to spun gold. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, not lowering his weapon. Beautiful women could be just as dangerous as men in the territories, sometimes more so. "Hope Blackburn," she answered, her voice steadier than her expression. "I was Mr. Porter's housekeeper. Are you Miles?" He narrowed his eyes, taking in her simple dress, the smudge of flour on her cheek, the way she held herself with dignity despite her obvious fear. "I am," he acknowledged, finally lowering his gun but not holstering it. "My uncle never mentioned a housekeeper in his letter." "He wouldn't have," she said, lowering her hand slowly. "Jeremiah was private about his affairs." Miles frowned. "How do I know you're not just claiming to work for him? Could be you moved in after he died, thinking to claim abandoned property." Something flickered across her face. Hurt, perhaps, or indignation. "There's soup on the stove," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "I've kept the house exactly as Jeremiah left it. His papers are in the study. And if that's not enough," she reached into a pocket of her dress and withdrew a silver pocket watch, holding it out to him. "He said to show you this. It belonged to your father before him." Miles stared at the watch, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. He remembered that watch, remembered his father checking it on cattle drives, remembered how the case had caught the firelight on cold nights. "Where did you get that?" he asked hoarsely. "Jeremiah gave it to me before he died. Said you'd know it was truly him that sent for you when you saw it." She extended her hand further. "Please, I'm not your enemy." The simple plea in those words pierced Miles in a way he hadn't expected. Slowly, he holstered his weapon and took the watch, its weight familiar even after all these years. "I still don't know why you're here," he said, but the edge had left his voice. Hope took a deep breath. "Perhaps we could discuss it over supper? You look like you've ridden a long way." Miles hesitated. His instinct was to demand answers immediately, to establish control of the situation. But exhaustion pulled at him, and the smell of the soup made his empty stomach growl traitorously. "Fine," he agreed reluctantly. "But afterward, I want the truth. All of it." Hope nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. "Of course. You deserve that much." As she turned back to the kitchen, Miles found his eyes lingering on her. Not just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but the way she moved with purpose, with belonging, through his uncle's home. This woman held secrets, and Miles Porter didn't like secrets. He'd learned the hard way that what you didn't know could destroy you. Hope ladled the rabbit soup into bowls, her hands steadier than she felt inside. The stranger, no, not stranger, Jeremiah's nephew, sat at the kitchen table, his tall frame making the room seem smaller. His presence filled the space in a way Jeremiah's never had, bringing with it a tension that made it hard to breathe. "You said you were my uncle's housekeeper," he said as she placed a bowl before him. "How long?" "Almost 2 years." She set a plate of cornbread beside his soup. "I came here in the summer of '78. Miles broke off a piece of the bread. "He never mentioned you in his letters." "You wrote to each other?" This surprised her. Jeremiah had spoken of Miles often, but never mentioned correspondence. "Not regularly. A few times a year." His eyes, a stormy blue, studied her face. "He told me about the ranch, about his horses. Never once mentioned a young woman living here." Hope sat across from him, smoothing her skirt. "As I said, Jeremiah was private. And perhaps he worried how it might sound. An unmarried woman living with an old bachelor, even as his housekeeper. That why you're still here? Protecting your reputation?" The question stung. "I'm here because Jeremiah asked me to stay until you arrived." She met his gaze directly. "He wanted me to help you understand the ranch, show you what he built here." Miles took a spoonful of soup, his eyes never leaving her face. After swallowing, he said, "This is good. You learned to cook out here." "No. My mother taught me, before she died. 5 years ago now." Something in his expression shifted slightly. "Lost mine when I was 15. Father when I was 13. "I know," Hope said softly. "Jeremiah told me." They ate in silence for a moment, the ticking of the clock in the other room the only sound besides their spoons against the bowls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling a loose shutter. "Storm coming," Miles observed, glancing toward the window. Hope nodded. "They blow in quick this time of year." "Your room is ready," Jeremiah's old room. "I've been staying in the spare bedroom." Miles raised an eyebrow. "You assumed I'd let you stay on?" "I hoped," she admitted. "I know this land." I know what your uncle was working toward, and I have nowhere else to go. The honesty of her statement hung in the air between them. Miles set down his spoon, considering her. What exactly was my uncle working toward? Hope hesitated. Perhaps it's better if I show you tomorrow, when there's light. Miles clearly didn't like this answer, but the distant rumble of thunder punctuated her point. Fine. Tomorrow. He pushed back from the table. I need to see to my horse before that storm hits. The barn is, I can find it. He cut her off, standing. At his full height, he towered over her. Just because I'm letting you stay the night doesn't mean I trust you, Miss Blackburn. Hope nodded, meeting his gaze steadily. I understand, Mr. Porter. But Jeremiah did, and I hope someday you will too. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or doubt, before he turned and strode out of the kitchen. Hope watched him go, his broad shoulders and confident stride so different from Jeremiah's stooped, careful movements. She began clearing the dishes, wondering if she'd made a mistake by revealing herself so soon. Jeremiah had advised patience, but hiding had seemed dishonest, especially with the soup already cooking when Miles arrived. Outside, the wind howled louder, bringing with it the first spatters of rain against the windows. Hope moved to secure the shutters, watching as Miles led his horse toward the barn, his figure blurring in the gathering storm. She touched the empty pocket where her father's watch had been. She'd given Miles the one thing Jeremiah had told her would earn his trust, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Tomorrow, she would have to show him everything, including the secret growing behind the barn, the real reason Jeremiah had summoned his nephew home. The storm pounded the ranch house through the night, wind shrieking around corners and rain hammering the roof like angry fists. Miles lay awake in his uncle's bed, listening to the old house creak and settle, trying to reconcile the property described in Jeremiah's letters with what he'd found. His uncle had written of good grazing land, a small but promising herd, plans for expansion. Yet Miles had seen no cattle, the corrals were empty, and the fences needed repair. And nowhere in those letters had Jeremiah mentioned a young, beautiful woman living under his roof. Hope Blackburn was a puzzle Miles couldn't solve. She spoke with education, moved with grace, and clearly knew the house intimately. Yet something in her story didn't add up. Why would his uncle keep her present secret? What was she hiding? And why did Miles find himself thinking about the flecks of gold in her green eyes instead of sleeping? Dawn broke clear and clean, the storm having washed away the dust and left behind a world of sharp clarity. Miles dressed and made his way downstairs, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drawing him to the kitchen. Hope stood at the stove, her blonde hair braided down her back, wearing a simple brown dress with a white apron tied around her slim waist. She turned at his entrance, offering a tentative smile. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you slept well despite the storm." "Well enough," he lied, taking the cup of coffee she offered. "You mentioned showing me what my uncle was working on." Her smile faltered slightly. "Yes, after breakfast. It's not what you might expect." They ate quickly, the silence between them charged with unasked questions. When they finished, Hope led him out the back door and across the muddy yard toward what appeared to be a second, smaller barn behind the main one. "Jeremiah built this 2 summers ago," she explained, producing a key from her pocket to unlock the heavy padlock on the door. "What's inside is, well, it's the reason he sent for you." Miles frowned, hand instinctively resting on his pistol. "What's so valuable it needs to be locked up out here?" Hope pushed open the door, releasing a wave of warm, humid air and the rich scent of soil and growing things. Not valuable to everyone, but to the right people, priceless. Miles stepped through the doorway and stopped, staring in disbelief. The interior was filled with plants, not crops or vegetables, but rows upon rows of strange, flowering herbs and shrubs growing in carefully tended beds. Along one wall, glass jars of dried plants stood in neat rows beside bottles of liquid. A work table held mortars, pestles, scales, and notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. "What is all this?" Miles asked, turning in a slow circle. Hope moved past him to check one of the plants, her fingers gentle on its leaves. "Medicinals. Healing plants. Some native to this region, others Jeremiah brought from back east or had shipped from as far as China." "My uncle was growing medicines?" Hope nodded. "He was a healer before he came west. Few people knew. He continued his work quietly here, treating neighbors when regular doctors failed them. She gestured to the notebooks. He documented everything, which plants treat which ailments, how to prepare them, proper dosages. Miles picked up one of the notebooks, flipping through pages of careful observations, detailed drawings, and notes on patients treated. Many of the entries were in his uncle's handwriting, but others. He looked up sharply. "These are your notes." Hope nodded. "I was his apprentice. Before I came here, I'd been studying botanical drawing. When Jeremiah discovered I could accurately render the plants, he began teaching me their properties." Her expression softened with memory. "He said I had a gift for healing, that my hands knew which plants wanted to help." Miles set down the notebook. "So you weren't just his housekeeper?" "No," she admitted, "though I did keep house for him as well. But primarily, I was his student." She gestured around the barn. "And now I'm the only one who knows how to maintain all this." Miles ran a hand through his hair, struggling to absorb what she was telling him. Why keep it secret? Why not just practice medicine openly? Hope's expression darkened. "Because not everyone approves of natural healing methods. The doctor in town, Dr. Maxwell, considers herbal medicine witchcraft. He's threatened to have practitioners arrested. And Jeremiah, well, he had his own reasons for keeping to himself." "What reasons?" She hesitated. "That's not my story to tell. But it's in his personal journal, which he left for you in his desk drawer." Miles felt a headache building behind his eyes. "So my uncle was a secretive medicine man who left me a ranch with no cattle and a garden of weeds." Hope's chin lifted, a flash of anger in her eyes. "These aren't weeds, Mr. Porter. This garden has saved dozens of lives. Children with fevers no doctor could break. Men with infections that would have cost them limbs. Women suffering after difficult births." Her passion caught him off guard. "And you know how to use all these herbs?" "Most of them. I'm still learning some of the more complex preparations." She stepped closer to him, her eyes intent. "Your uncle believed in this work. It's why he sent for you. He knew he was dying and wanted someone he trusted to protect what he'd built." "Protect it from what?" "From Dr. Maxwell, who wants this knowledge destroyed. From people who fear what they don't understand." She gestured to the plants around them. "These need daily care. Without it, years of work will die." Miles moved away from her, needing space to think. "I came here expecting cattle and horses, Miss Blackburn. Not whatever this is. I'm a cowboy, not a medicine man." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why Jeremiah asked me to stay and teach you. Or at least maintain the garden until you decide what to do with it." Miles stared at the rows of plants, so carefully tended, so completely foreign to his understanding of ranching. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. He'd expected to find land he could work or sell, not a secret garden and a beautiful woman with secrets in her eyes. "I need to think," he said abruptly, moving toward the door. "Of course." Hope didn't try to stop him. "When you're ready, there's more to show you. The cattle are on the north pasture, 30 head. The hands who managed them left after Jeremiah died. And there's a horse breeding program he started last year." Miles paused at the door. "There are actual cattle?" Hope nodded. "Jeremiah wasn't just growing plants, Mr. Porter. This was a working ranch too. But the medicinals, they were his true passion." Miles looked back at her, standing amid the herbs and flowers, sunlight streaming through the windows to catch in her honey-blonde hair. Something about her belonged here, among these growing things, in a way Miles had never belonged anywhere. "I'll be back," he said, and stepped out into the morning light, his mind churning with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Hope watched Miles stride away, his broad shoulders tense under his work shirt. She'd expected shock, even anger, but the confusion in his eyes had been almost boyish. Jeremiah had described his nephew as hard, shaped by loss into a man who kept his distance from others. But she'd seen vulnerability beneath his wariness, a capacity for wonder he couldn't quite suppress when confronting the garden. She turned back to her work, checking each plant, noting which needed water, which were ready for harvesting. This garden was her home more than the ranch house had ever been. These plants spoke to her in ways people rarely did, their needs simple and honest. 2 hours passed before she heard the barn door open again. Miles stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I found my uncle's journal," he said without preamble, "and I rode out to see the cattle." Hope set down her pruning shears. "And the cattle are there, like you said. Good stock, though they need attention." He stepped into the barn, closing the door behind him. "The journal was Unexpected. Did it answer your questions? Hope asked softly. Miles moved further into the garden, touching a broad-leafed plant cautiously. Some. It explained why he left the East. Why he kept his medical knowledge secret. Hope nodded. Understanding washed through her. He accidentally killed someone. A patient. A child with scarlet fever, Miles confirmed. He tried an experimental treatment that went wrong. The family forgave him, but he couldn't forgive himself. Came west to start over. His eyes found hers. How did you know? He told me, after I made a mistake that could have harmed someone. A preparation too strong for the patient. She looked down at her dirt-stained hands. He wanted me to understand that even with the best intentions, healers can cause harm. Miles studied her thoughtfully. The journal mentioned you. Said you came to him injured, running from something. Hope stiffened. Did it say what? No. Just that you needed protection and had a gift he couldn't ignore. He took a step closer. What were you running from, Hope? The sound of her first name on his lips made her heart skip. The past, she answered carefully. Like most people who come west. Not good enough, he said, though his tone remained gentle. If I'm to trust you, I need to know who might come looking for you. Hope turned away, busying her hands with the plants. No one will come looking. They think I'm dead. Who thinks you're dead? She closed her eyes briefly, then faced him again. My stepfather and his son. They. She faltered, the words sticking in her throat. After my mother died, they changed. My stepfather had always been strict, but he became cruel. And his son, Thomas. She wrapped her arms around herself. He decided I was to be his wife, whether I consented or not. Miles's expression darkened. Did he hurt you? He tried. I fought back. Her voice grew steadier as she continued. One night, when my stepfather was away, Thomas came to my room. I struck him with a fire poker and ran. Took my mother's botanical journals and my father's watch and fled town. And they think you're dead because the night I fled, their house caught fire. She met his eyes directly. I didn't set it. Perhaps Thomas knocked over a lamp when he fell, I don't know. But I read in a newspaper weeks later that they'd found remains they believed to be mine. Miles was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. So you let them believe you died in a fire rather than face accusations. I let them believe what they wanted to believe, she corrected. I was alone, without protection, and Thomas had friends in the sheriff's office. Who would have believed me over the son of the town's wealthiest man? Miles nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And my uncle took you in, gave you sanctuary. And purpose, she added softly. He taught me to use the knowledge my mother had begun to share before her death. Showed me that what I could do with plants wasn't something to hide. Miles ran a hand through his dark hair, disturbing the careful part. I came here thinking to sell this place as soon as possible, he admitted. Go back to what I know, driving cattle, working ranches owned by other men. Hope's heart sank, though she'd expected as much. I understand. The garden isn't something many would want responsibility for. No, it isn't, he agreed. But my uncle's journal made it clear he thought it was important. Worth preserving. He gestured around the garden. I don't understand any of this. Don't know a healing herb from a weed. But I understand a dying man's wishes. Hope dared to hope. What are you saying? I'm saying I won't sell. Not yet. His eyes met hers, serious, but no longer cold. I need to understand what my uncle built here before I can decide its fate. And for that, he took a deep breath, as if the words cost him something. For that, I need your help. Relief flooded through Hope. You'll stay? For now. His expression remained guarded. I'm not promising anything beyond that, but I'll give it time. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And I could use your help with more than just the garden. I saw the state of the fences on my ride. Hope smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Porter. I can mend fences with the best of them. Miles, he corrected. If we're going to be working together, you should call me Miles. Miles, she repeated, liking how it felt on her tongue. Thank you for believing me. Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Don't thank me yet. I'm still not convinced this garden of my uncle's is worth the trouble it might bring. Then I'll have to convince you, Hope said with quiet determination. Starting today, as they left the garden together, Hope felt the first fragile tendril of hope taking root. Miles Porter was not the hard, cold man his uncle had described in his letters. Beneath that careful exterior was someone capable of compassion, of understanding. Someone, perhaps, who might come to see the value in what Jeremiah had built. Not just the plants, but the community of people who depended on the healing they provided. People who would soon come seeking help only Hope could provide. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Miles threw himself into learning the ranch. True to her word, Hope worked alongside him, her delicate hands proving surprisingly capable with hammer and nails. During the days, they repaired fences, checked on the cattle, and Miles began breaking the half-wild mustangs his uncle had captured from the nearby hills. In the evenings, Hope showed him the garden, patiently explaining each plant's properties, showing him her detailed drawings, teaching him to recognize the subtle differences between healing herbs and their poisonous lookalikes. Miles found himself watching her more than the plants, mesmerized by the animation in her face when she spoke of healing, the gentle way her fingers handled the delicate leaves, the quiet confidence that transformed her from the wary young woman he'd first met into someone who knew her worth. It was during the 3rd week that the first visitor arrived. Miles was repairing the barn roof when he spotted the approaching wagon. A middle-aged man drove, a woman beside him holding what appeared to be a bundled child. "Hope," he called down. "Company coming." Hope emerged from the garden barn, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the wagon, her expression changed to one of concern. "It's the Hendersons," she said, shading her eyes against the sun. "Their youngest has been ill." Miles climbed down the ladder, joining her in the yard as the wagon pulled up. The woman immediately began speaking to Hope in urgent tones. "She's worse, Miss Hope. The fever won't break, and she won't take any food. Dr. Maxwell gave us more of that tonic, but it only makes her sleep without healing her." Hope nodded, already moving toward the garden. "Bring her inside the house, Mrs. Henderson. I'll prepare something stronger this time." Miles stood awkwardly as the man lifted a small, feverish child from the wagon. The girl couldn't have been more than 4, her face flushed with fever, her breathing labored. "You must be Porter's nephew," the man said, shifting his daughter in his arms. "Jim Henderson. We farm 10 miles east." Miles nodded. "Miles Porter. Hope told us you'd arrived. Said you might be continuing your uncle's work." Hope hadn't mentioned any such conversation to Miles, and he raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he followed Henderson into the house. Inside, Hope had already transformed the kitchen table into a treatment area, laying out clean cloths, a basin of cool water, and several bottles from the garden. "Put her here, Mr. Henderson," she directed, her voice calm but commanding. "Mrs. Henderson, please help me remove her dress. We need to cool her body." Miles watched in fascination as Hope worked, her movements efficient and sure. She mixed a tincture from several bottles, then coaxed the barely conscious child to swallow it. Next, she soaked cloths in water infused with herbs, wrapping them around the girl's small limbs. "The fever is trying to fight the infection," she explained to the anxious parents. "But it's too strong and harming her instead of helping. This will lower the fever while supporting her body's fight." For the next hour, Hope tended to the child, periodically checking her pulse, replacing the cooling cloths, administering tiny sips of different preparations. Miles found himself helping without being asked, bringing fresh water, holding the girl upright when needed, following Hope's quiet instructions as if they'd worked together for years instead of weeks. Gradually, the child's breathing eased. The angry flush began to fade from her cheeks, and she fell into a more natural sleep. "The fever's breaking," Hope announced finally, relief evident in her voice. "She'll sleep now, truly rest instead of fighting so hard." Mrs. Henderson burst into tears, clutching Hope's hand. "We thought we might lose her," she whispered. "Dr. Maxwell said to prepare ourselves." "Emma is stronger than she looks," Hope assured her, squeezing the woman's hand. "She needs rest now, and continued treatment. You'll take these with you." She indicated several bottles she'd prepared while tending the child. 3 drops of this, one every 4 hours. A spoonful of this when she wakes. And this salve for her chest to help her breathing. Mr. Henderson approached Miles as the women spoke. "Your uncle saved my wife's life 3 years ago when childbirth went wrong," he said quietly. "Now Hope saved my daughter. Whatever you decide to do with this place, Mr. Porter, I hope you'll keep that garden growing." Miles nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment he'd just witnessed. He'd seen men survive gunshot wounds, broken bones, even rattlesnake bites. But watching Hope coax that child back from the brink of dangerous fever with nothing but plants and knowledge, it stirred something in him he thought long dead. As the Hendersons prepared to leave, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, Mrs. Henderson pressed a cloth-wrapped bundle into Hope's hands. "Fresh bread and preserves," she said. "It's not payment enough, but it's more than enough," Hope assured her. "Just bring Emma back in a week so I can check her progress." After they'd gone, Miles found Hope in the kitchen, washing her hands, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "You saved that child's life," he said simply. Hope glanced up, a tired smile touching her lips. "I used what Jeremiah taught me, what my mother began teaching me before she died." She dried her hands on a towel. "This is what the garden is for, Miles. Not just plants, but people. Lives saved, suffering eased." Miles leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "You told them I might continue my uncle's work." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "I said you were considering it. I didn't want to turn them away if they came seeking help." Her eyes met his. Was that wrong? Miles surprised himself with his answer. No, it wasn't wrong. He pushed away from the doorframe, moving to help her clear the table. "I've never seen anything like what you just did." "Medicine takes many forms," she said, her voice softening. "Jeremiah believed the natural world provides remedies if we learn to recognize them. That knowledge doesn't belong to doctors alone." As they worked together to restore order to the kitchen, Miles found himself standing closer to Hope than strictly necessary, drawn to her warmth, her quiet strength. When their hands brushed as they reached for the same cloth, he felt it like a current through his body. "Thank you for helping," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do much," he admitted. "You were there," she countered. "You didn't turn them away. You helped when I needed hands." Her eyes, when they met his, held something beyond gratitude. That's more than most would have done. For a moment, Miles thought he might close the small distance between them, might discover if her lips were as soft as they looked. But caution reasserted itself, reminding him of all the reasons to keep his distance. This woman and her garden represented attachment, roots, everything he'd avoided since his parents' deaths. "I should check on the horses," he said, stepping back. "Make sure that new colt is settling in." Something like disappointment flickered across Hope's face, but she nodded. "Of course. I need to replenish what we used today anyway." As Miles walked to the corral, he couldn't shake the image of Hope bending over that feverish child, her face determined, her hands gentle but sure. She'd shown more courage in that kitchen than many men he'd known on cattle drives or in saloon brawls. And for the first time in 7 years, Miles Porter wondered if running from attachment was truly the strength he'd believed it to be, or if it was another kind of weakness altogether. Word spread quickly through the scattered homesteads and small ranches of Silver Creek. Jeremiah Porter's nephew had arrived, and more importantly, Hope Blackburn was still tending the medicinal garden. Within days, more visitors arrived. A rancher with a badly infected hand, a pregnant woman troubled by weakness and dizziness, a teenage boy with a mysterious rash. Hope treated them all, with Miles increasingly at her side, learning the basics of which preparations treated which ailments. He watched in wonder as people who arrived in pain or distress left with relief and hope, offering payment in the form of preserves, fresh eggs, smoked meat, or occasionally, much-needed cash. But not all in Silver Creek welcomed their work. A week after the Henderson child's visit, Miles rode into town for supplies, leaving Hope at the ranch repotting seedlings. The general store owner, a barrel-chested man named Wilson, greeted him warmly. "Porter, good to see you settling in. Your uncle was a private man, but well-respected. Folks are glad to see Elkhorn Ranch occupied again." Miles nodded, selecting the items on Hope's carefully written list. "Seems like a good community." It is, Wilson agreed, then lowered his voice. "Though I should warn you, not everyone's pleased about the, special garden you're maintaining." Miles stiffened. "Meaning?" "Dr. Maxwell's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. Says you and that Blackburn girl are practicing medicine without a license, stealing his patients with folk remedies and superstition." Wilson shook his head. "Don't mind him much. He's bitter because your uncle helped people Maxwell couldn't. But he has the ear of Sheriff Collins, so tread carefully." "We're not claiming to be doctors," Miles said, keeping his voice level. "Just using knowledge of plants my uncle gathered." "I know that, and most folks around here know it too." Wilson began wrapping Miles's purchases. Just thought you should be aware. Maxwell's the type to hold a grudge. Miles was pondering this warning when the store's door opened, admitting a tall, silver-haired man in a tailored suit, carrying a doctor's bag. "Speak of the devil," Wilson muttered. The newcomer's eyes narrowed when he spotted Miles. "You must be Porter's nephew," he said, his tone making it clear the connection was no recommendation. "I'm Dr. Elias Maxwell." Miles nodded curtly. "Miles Porter. I understand you're continuing your uncle's hobby," Maxwell said, the last word dripping with disdain. "Dangerous business, giving people plant concoctions when they need proper medical care." Miles felt his temper rising, but kept his voice even. "The Henderson child seems to be recovering well under our care, from what I hear." A flush of anger crept up Maxwell's neck. The child would have recovered naturally. Now her parents credit your untrained housekeeper instead of recognizing the effectiveness of my treatments. "Seems to me results matter more than credit," Miles observed, gathering his purchases. "Good day, Dr. Maxwell." "Mr. Wilson." As he loaded his supplies into his saddlebags outside, Maxwell emerged from the store, moving to intercept him. "A word of friendly advice, Porter," the doctor said, all pretense of civility gone from his voice. "That woman living in your house is not what she seems. I've made inquiries. She appeared out of nowhere 2 years ago, with no references, no family connections. For all you know, she could be running from the law." Miles mounted his horse, looking down at Maxwell with cold eyes. "Miss Blackburn has my full confidence. And my protection. Remember that if you're thinking of causing trouble." The doctor's face hardened. "Your uncle was a fool to trust her, and you're following in his footsteps. Mark my words. No good will come of harboring that woman or continuing his misguided practices." Miles resisted the urge to reach for his pistol, reminding himself that threatening a doctor in broad daylight would do more harm than good. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode out of town, Maxwell's warning echoing in his ears. When he returned to the ranch, he found Hope in the garden, her hair escaping its braid as she worked, a smudge of dirt on one cheek. She looked up at his approach, her smile fading as she caught his expression. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her trowel. Miles dismounted, leading his horse to the hitching post. "Met Dr. Maxwell in town. He's not a fan of our operation here." Hope's face paled slightly. "What did he say?" "That you're not what you seem. That my uncle was a fool to trust you." Miles watched her reaction carefully. "He implied you might be a criminal." Hope's chin lifted, though her hands trembled slightly. "And do you believe him?" "I believe you told me the truth about your stepfather and his son," Miles said. "But I also believe there may be more to your story than you've shared." She looked away, busying herself with the plants. "There's nothing more that matters." Miles stepped closer, gently turning her to face him. "Hope, if there's anything else I should know, anything that could cause trouble for you or for this ranch, now's the time to tell me." Her eyes, when they met his, were troubled but direct. "I've told you everything that matters, Miles. I ran from men who wanted to control me, to hurt me. I found sanctuary with Jeremiah. I learned to heal." Her voice softened. "Everything I am now is here, in this garden, in this work." Miles studied her face, searching for deception and finding only vulnerability and determination. Against his better judgment, he believed her. "All right," he said finally. "But Maxwell clearly has it in for us. We need to be careful." Hope nodded, relief visible in her expression. "We will be." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for defending me without knowing the whole story." "I've seen enough of you these past weeks to make my own judgments," Miles replied. "And whatever you were running from, I don't think it was justice." A genuine smile brightened her face. "No, never that." As they walked together toward the house, Miles felt the protective instinct that had been growing since he'd first watched her tend the Henderson child solidify into something deeper, more personal. Hope Blackburn had secrets still, but so did he. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to share the burden of his past with someone who might understand. Someone with gentle hands and eyes that saw more than most. That night, a late spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing pounding rain and gusty winds that rattled the windows of the ranch house. Hope sat by the fire in the front room, working on a detailed drawing of a flowering plant Miles had discovered on the north pasture. She'd been delighted when he'd brought it to her, carefully uprooted with the soil still clinging to its roots. This could be a local variant of echinacea, she'd explained, her eyes bright with excitement. If it is, it might be even more effective for infections than what we currently use. Now she glanced up as Miles entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her before settling into the chair opposite, the firelight casting warm shadows across his features. In the 3 weeks since his arrival, his face had lost some of its hardness, though the wariness remained in his eyes. "Storm's getting worse," he observed, sipping his coffee. "Might flood the lower pasture if it keeps up." Hope set aside her drawing. "The cattle. Moved them to higher ground this afternoon. Saw the clouds building." He nodded toward her paper. "How's the mystery plant?" "Promising," she smiled. "I'll need to test it carefully, but I think Jeremiah would have been excited by the find." Thunder crashed outside, and the wind howled around the eaves of the old house. Hope pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, grateful for the solid walls between them and the storm's fury. "Nights like this, I remember why I was so grateful when your uncle took me in," she said softly. "I spent 3 nights in weather like this, hiding in barns or under trees, before I reached Silver Creek." Miles studied her over the rim of his cup. Must have been terrifying for a young woman alone. It was, she admitted, but not as terrifying as staying. She hesitated, then asked, "What about you? What made you choose the life of a drifter?" Miles was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Hope had almost given up on receiving an answer when he finally spoke. "After my mother died, I had nothing keeping me in one place. My father's ranch had been sold to pay debts. No siblings, no other family I knew of." His voice was low, thoughtful. "At first, moving around was just necessity. Then it became a habit. Then a belief." "A belief?" Hope prompted gently. His eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "That staying in one place, putting down roots, caring too much, it only sets you up for loss. The frontier doesn't reward attachment. It punishes it." Hope considered this, recognizing the belief for what it was, a shield against pain. "And yet, here you are, on your uncle's ranch, with roots already starting to grow whether you want them or not." A reluctant smile touched his lips. "Seems that way, doesn't it?" "Is it so terrible?" she asked. "Having a place that's yours? People who look to you for help." Miles set down his cup. "It's not terrible," he admitted. "It's just unfamiliar. Dangerous, in its way. More dangerous than facing down cattle rustlers or breaking wild horses?" she challenged softly. "Different kind of danger." His voice dropped lower. "When you face a physical threat, you know what you're risking. But this..." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the ranch, perhaps even Hope herself. "This risks something deeper." Hope understood then what he wasn't saying. That Jeremiah's legacy had pulled Miles into a life he'd deliberately avoided, forced him to care about something beyond survival. And perhaps to care about someone. "I think," she began, but was interrupted by a frantic pounding on the front door. Miles was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol he still wore even indoors. Hope rose more slowly, setting aside her drawing as Miles moved cautiously to the door. "Who's there?" he called. "Jim Henderson," came the desperate reply. "Please, we need help." Miles opened the door to reveal Henderson standing in the driving rain, his clothes soaked through, his face haggard with fear. "It's Emma," he gasped as Miles pulled him inside. "The fever's back, worse than before. Sarah's with her, but she's barely breathing. Dr. Maxwell gave us more of his tonic, but she's failing fast." Hope was already moving, grabbing her shawl. "I'll need to come with you. The treatment needs to be stronger, administered directly." "In this storm?" Miles protested. "The creek could be flooding already." "Then we'd better hurry," Hope replied, her voice brooking no argument. "Mr. Henderson, give me 2 minutes to gather what I need." She rushed to the garden barn, Miles close behind her. As she quickly collected bottles and packets of dried herbs, he spoke urgently. "This is madness. The trails will be washed out. It's too dangerous." Hope looked up at him, her eyes steady despite her fear. "That child will die without help, Miles. I can't let that happen when I have the knowledge to save her." Something in her expression must have reached him, because after a moment, he nodded. "I'm coming with you." The trail to Henderson's crosses 3 low points that could be underwater already. "You'll need someone who knows the high ground routes." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding out into the storm, Henderson leading the way, Miles keeping close to Hope's side as the rain lashed at them and lightning split the sky. The trail was treacherous, mud sucking at the horses' hooves, branches whipping across their path, but Miles guided them confidently, taking game trails and ridgelines Hope wouldn't have found on her own. When they reached the first creek crossing, they found it transformed into a churning torrent, the usual ford completely submerged. "We can't cross here," Henderson shouted over the storm. "It's too deep." "There's another way," Miles called back. "Half a mile upstream, there's a fallen pine that spans the creek. We can lead the horses across it." Hope's heart pounded as they followed Miles through the darkness, the rain stinging her face, her clothes plastered to her skin. When they reached the fallen tree, she could barely make it out in the gloom, a massive trunk spanning the roaring water, its surface slick with rain. "I'll go first," Miles decided, dismounting. "Test its strength. Then Henderson, then Hope. We'll lead the horses through the water. They can swim it here where it's not so turbulent." Hope watched, heart in her throat, as Miles carefully made his way across the slippery log. When he reached the other side, he waved them on, and Henderson followed, then Hope, each step a test of balance and nerve as the creek roared beneath them. Leading the horses through the water proved even more harrowing. Hope's mare balked at first, then plunged in, the current nearly sweeping it away before it found its footing on the far bank. By the time all three were across, Hope was shaking from cold and fear, but the thought of little Emma fighting for breath drove her forward. They reached the Henderson farm after another hour of grueling travel. Mrs. Henderson met them at the door, her face streaked with tears. "She's worse," she sobbed as they hurried inside. "I don't think she's breathing right." Hope rushed to the child's bedside, Miles close behind her. Emma lay still and pale, her breathing shallow and irregular, her small body burning with fever. Hope immediately began unpacking her supplies, her wet hands steady despite her exhaustion. "Boil water," she instructed Mrs. Henderson. "Miles, I need you to hold her upright while I prepare the tincture." For the next hour, Hope worked feverishly, applying poultices to draw out the fever, administering drops of powerful herbal extracts, massaging the child's chest with aromatic oils to ease her labored breathing. Miles stayed by her side throughout, supporting Emma's limp body when needed, fetching fresh water, following Hope's instructions without hesitation. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small farmhouse, a different battle was being fought, one against death itself, with a child's life hanging in the balance. Dawn was breaking, the storm finally abating, when Emma's fever broke for the second time. Her breathing eased, and color began returning to her pale cheeks. When she finally opened her eyes, both her parents burst into tears of relief. Hope sagged against the wall, utterly spent. Miles caught her arm, steadying her, his eyes full of concern. "You need rest," he said quietly. "You've been working all night." She nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Emma needs to be watched for the next few hours. The fever could return if the infection hasn't fully cleared." "I'll watch her," Mrs. Henderson promised. "You've done more than enough, Miss Hope. More than we can ever repay." Mr. Henderson approached, his face solemn. "You rode through a flood to save our daughter. Both of you risked your lives." His voice broke. "There's no way to thank you enough for that. Just keep her warm and follow the treatment schedule I wrote down," Hope said, summoning a tired smile. "And perhaps some hot coffee before we ride back, if you have it." As Mrs. Henderson bustled to prepare coffee and food, Miles led Hope to a chair by the fire, his hand gentle on her arm. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "Not just riding through the storm, but the way you fought for that child all night." Hope looked up at him, surprised by the admiration in his voice. "I couldn't let her die, Miles. Not when I knew I could help." "I know." His hand moved to her cheek, brushing away a strand of wet hair. "That's who you are? That's why my uncle chose you as his apprentice. Why he trusted you with his knowledge." Something in his touch, in the warmth of his gaze, melted a part of Hope that had remained frozen since her flight from her stepfather's house. For a moment, she allowed herself to lean into his hand, to draw strength from his steady presence. "Thank you for coming with me," she whispered. "I couldn't have made it here alone." Miles's reply was lost as the Hendersons returned with coffee and hot biscuits, but the look in his eyes stayed with Hope long after they'd mounted up for the journey home. A look that suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, Miles Porter was discovering there were things worth the risk of attachment after all. The storm left its mark on the ranch. Fences were down in the lower pasture, a section of the barn roof had been damaged, and debris littered the yard. But it left a deeper mark on Miles and Hope, forging a connection between them that grew stronger with each passing day. They fell into a rhythm, Miles tending the ranch work in the mornings while Hope worked in the garden, then joining forces in the afternoons to treat the steady stream of patients who came seeking help. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Hope teaching Miles to identify plants from her drawings, Miles sharing stories of his years on the trail. 2 weeks after the night ride to save Emma Henderson, Miles found himself watching Hope as she tended a young woman's sprained wrist, her fingers gentle but sure as she wrapped the injury in a bandage soaked in a soothing preparation. The patient, a newlywed named Abigail Carter, was clearly in pain but managed a grateful smile as Hope finished. "That already feels better," she sighed. "John warned me not to try breaking that filly myself, but I've always been stubborn." Hope smiled, securing the bandage. "Keep it wrapped for at least 3 days. Apply this salve morning and night." She handed over a small jar. "And perhaps listen to your husband next time." Abigail laughed. "Not likely, but I'll be more careful." She glanced between Hope and Miles, her expression curious. "You two make a good team. Everyone's talking about how you saved the Henderson child during that terrible storm." Miles felt a flush of warmth at her words, though he kept his expression neutral. "Miss Blackburn did the saving. I just got her there." "Through floodwaters," Abigail pointed out. "John says that creek crossing was 10 feet underwater the next day." She collected her things, adding casually, "You know, the summer social's coming up in 2 weeks. First one since you arrived, Mr. Porter. You should both come, meet more of your neighbors properly." After she'd gone, Hope busied herself clearing away the bandaging materials, a slight flush on her cheeks. "The social is quite an event in Silver Creek," she said. "Jeremiah never attended, but—" "Would you like to go?" Miles asked, surprising himself with the question. Hope looked up, her eyes widening. I haven't been to anything like that since I came west." "Neither have I," Miles admitted. "Not much call for social gatherings on cattle drives." Hope hesitated, then smiled. "I think I would like to go, if you would." Miles found himself returning her smile. "Then we'll go." The prospect of attending a social event would have sent Miles riding in the opposite direction just a month earlier. But now, the thought of escorting Hope, of seeing her in something other than her practical work dresses, of perhaps even dancing with her, it stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. The days passed quickly as they repaired the storm damage and continued treating patients. Miles found himself looking forward to the evenings most of all, when the work was done and he could sit with Hope by the fire, listening to her voice as she shared her knowledge or asked about his experiences on the frontier. One evening, as they sat together, a comfortable silence between them, Miles found himself studying her profile in the firelight. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her, a quiet determination that had carried her through hardships that would have broken many. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his gaze. "That you're not what I expected to find when I came here," he answered honestly. She smiled. "What did you expect?" "Nothing like this." He gestured to encompass the house, the ranch, the life they'd begun to build together. "Nothing like you." Her smile softened. "And is that disappointment I hear, or something else?" Miles reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Her skin was warm, slightly calloused from garden work, and perfectly fitted to his palm. "Not disappointment," he said quietly. "For the first time in years, Hope. I'm thinking about tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that." Her fingers tightened around his. "That sounds suspiciously like putting down roots, Miles Porter." "Maybe it is." He drew a deep breath, ready to say more, when a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Miles reluctantly released her hand, moving to answer. On the porch stood Sheriff Collins, a stocky man with a thick mustache and watchful eyes. Behind him waited Dr. Maxwell, his expression smug. "Evening, Porter," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "Need a word with you and Miss Blackburn." Miles's instincts flared in warning, but he kept his voice even. "Of course, Sheriff. Come in." Hope had risen, her face composed though Miles could see the tension in her shoulders. She nodded politely to the sheriff, deliberately ignoring Maxwell. "What can we help you with, Sheriff?" she asked. Collins cleared his throat. Got a complaint about your medical activities here. Dr. Maxwell says you're practicing medicine without proper training or licensing. Says it's dangerous to the community. Hope's chin lifted. We make no claim to being doctors, Sheriff. We simply share knowledge of herbal preparations that Jeremiah Porter spent years documenting. Knowledge that saved lives, Miles added pointedly. Including Emma Henderson's, twice now. Maxwell stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Coincidence and superstition. That child recovered naturally. Meanwhile, you're undermining proper medical practice in this community and endangering lives with your untested concoctions. Untested. Hope's voice was quiet but firm. Every preparation we use was documented by Jeremiah Porter over years of careful observation. Every plant's properties verified through multiple applications. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Look, I'm not here to debate the effectiveness. The issue is legal. Montana Territory has regulations about medical practice, which we're not violating, Miles countered. We're not performing surgery, setting bones, or claiming medical degrees we don't have. We're growing plants and sharing their properties. Maxwell sneered. And taking payment for it. We accept gifts from grateful neighbors, Hope corrected. Just as Jeremiah did. We turn no one away, regardless of their ability to pay. The sheriff sighed, clearly caught between conflicting interests. Here's how it stands. I can't stop you from growing plants or giving away herbal remedies to friends. But if Dr. Maxwell provides evidence you're presenting yourselves as medical practitioners or charging for treatment, I'll have to take official action. There won't be any evidence of that, Miles said firmly. Because it isn't happening. Maxwell's face darkened. This isn't over, Porter. That woman has you fooled just like she fooled your uncle. Did you know she arrived here with nothing but a stolen watch and suspicious drawings? No references, no history anyone could verify. Miles stepped forward, his hand dropping instinctively to where his pistol would be, though he'd removed it earlier. Be very careful what you imply about Miss Blackburn in my house, Doctor. The sheriff moved between them. That's enough. Maxwell, you've made your complaint. Porter, you've been warned. He put his hat back on. I'll be watching this situation. Don't make me have to choose sides. After they'd gone, Hope sank into a chair, her face pale. He's not going to stop, Miles. Not until he drives us out or finds a way to arrest me. Miles knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. He won't find a way because there isn't one. You've done nothing wrong. But he's right about one thing, she said softly. I did arrive here with nothing but a stolen watch, my father's watch, and my mother's botanical drawings. No one here knows who I was before. It would be easy to paint me as a criminal, a confidence woman preying on a lonely old man, and now his nephew. Miles squeezed her hands. No one who's seen you with patience would believe that. No one who knows you. Hope looked down at their joined hands. Maxwell has influence, and he clearly has suspicions about my past. Let him suspect, Miles said firmly. The people who matter know the truth. Hope's eyes, when they met his, were troubled but grateful. When did you become such a believer in me, Miles Porter? He smiled, reaching up to touch her cheek. Somewhere between watching you save a child's life and riding through a flood to do it again. Some things you just know, Hope. And I know who you are, regardless of where you came from or what name you carried before. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. Thank you, she whispered. Miles wanted nothing more than to draw her into his arms, to protect her from Maxwell and his threats, to show her that she wasn't alone anymore. But the moment was fragile, the trust between them still new and tentative. Instead, he rose, gently pulling her to her feet. We should get some rest. Tomorrow we have fences to finish and patients to see, and apparently, a social to prepare for. Hope smiled, some of the worry leaving her eyes. Yes, life goes on, doesn't it? It does, Miles agreed. And Maxwell can't stop that, no matter how hard he tries. As they parted for the night, Miles found himself standing at his bedroom window, staring out at the moonlit ranch. For the first time since arriving at Elkhorn, he felt truly protective of it, not just as property, but as a home. Their home. And he was beginning to understand that the mysterious inheritance his uncle had left him wasn't just land and buildings, but something far more precious. A purpose. A place to belong. And perhaps, if he was brave enough to reach for it, a love that could heal the wounds of his past. The day of the summer social dawned clear and warm. Hope had risen early to complete her garden work, knowing the afternoon would be consumed with preparations. She'd spent the previous evening altering one of her few good dresses, a sky blue cotton with a lace collar that she'd rarely had occasion to wear. As she pinned her hair up before the small mirror in her room, she couldn't help but wonder what Miles would think. Would he find her beautiful? Would he dance with her? The thought sent a flutter through her stomach that was equal parts excitement and anxiety. They'd grown closer in the days since Maxwell and the sheriff's visit, working side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, their conversations flowing more freely. Sometimes she caught Miles watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, something warm and wondering that suggested he was seeing past her competent exterior to the woman beneath. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Hope, are you nearly ready?" The wagons hitched up. She smoothed her skirts one last time, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Miles stood in the hallway, and the sight of him made her heart skip. He'd clearly made an effort for the social, wearing a clean white shirt with a dark vest and his best trousers. He'd trimmed his hair and beard and polished his boots to a shine. He looked handsome, respectable, and completely stunned as he took in her appearance. "You look," he began, then seemed to lose his words. "I've never seen you with your hair up like that." Hope touched the carefully arranged curls self-consciously. "Is it too much?" "No," he said quickly. "No, it's beautiful. You're beautiful, Hope." The simple sincerity in his voice warmed her from within. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." A flush crept up his neck, and he offered his arm with a slight bow. "Shall we?" The drive to town was filled with a new awareness between them. Hope was conscious of Miles beside her on the wagon seat, of his occasional glances, of the way their shoulders sometimes touched on the bumpy road. For the first time since arriving at Elkhorn Ranch, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a future that included this man beside her, this growing connection between them. Silver Creek's town square had been transformed for the social. Lanterns hung from trees, tables laden with food lined one side of the cleared area, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift platform. Couples and families were already arriving, the women in their best dresses, the men in clean shirts and polished boots. As Miles helped Hope down from the wagon, several people called out greetings, friendly faces recognizing them from treatment visits. The Hendersons approached immediately, little Emma running ahead to hug Hope's skirts. "Miss Hope, Mr. Miles, you came," the child exclaimed, her face glowing with health that had seemed impossible during that stormy night. Hope knelt to embrace her. "Of course we did, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "All better," Emma declared. "Papa says I'm stronger than a mountain lion now." Jim Henderson shook Miles's hand warmly. "Good to see you both out socializing. You worked too hard out at that ranch." Miles smiled, his hand coming to rest lightly on Hope's back as she rose. "It's been a busy time, getting things in order." "Well, you've made quite an impression already," Sarah Henderson said, smiling at Hope. "Half the county's talking about your garden and the good it's doing." "And the other half?" Miles asked, his expression guarded. Jim's face darkened slightly. "Maxwell's got some supporters, mostly folks who haven't needed your help yet. But don't worry about that tonight. This is a celebration." As the evening progressed, Hope found herself welcomed by most of the community. Women sought her advice on minor ailments, farmers' wives shared preserving techniques, and young mothers proudly showed off babies she'd helped deliver. Miles stayed close by her side, his presence reassuring as they navigated the social dynamics of Silver Creek together. When the musicians began playing in earnest, couples moved to the cleared space to dance. Hope watched them, a wistfulness stealing over her. It had been so long since she'd danced, since before her mother's death, when life had been simpler. "Would you like to dance?" Miles asked quietly, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. Hope accepted the cup, her heart suddenly racing. "I'm not sure I remember how." A smile touched his lips. "That makes 2 of us. But I'm willing to try if you are." Setting aside their cups, Miles led her to the edge of the dancing area. He placed one hand at her waist, taking her other hand in his, and they began to move to the lively fiddle music. At first, they were stiff and uncertain, but gradually they found their rhythm, Miles guiding her with surprising grace for a man who claimed to have forgotten how to dance. "You're better at this than you admitted," Hope laughed as he twirled her. "Don't tell anyone," he replied with a grin. "But my mother insisted I learn properly." Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo. Hope laughed again, delighting in this glimpse of his past, of the boy he had been before grief had shaped him into the cautious man. As the music slowed into a waltz, Miles drew her closer, their bodies moving together with growing confidence. Hope was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, of the warmth of his shoulder beneath her palm, of his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm glad we came," she said softly. "So am I." His voice was low, meant only for her. "I've never seen you look happier than you do right now." "I am happy," she admitted. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again when I fled my stepfather's house." Miles's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "You deserve happiness, Hope. After everything you've been through, everything you've built at Elkhorn." "We've built," she corrected gently. "It wouldn't be the same without you, Miles." Something shifted in his gaze, a deepening, a decision forming. "Hope, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been feeling." "Well, isn't this cozy?" a cold voice interrupted. The fraud in her protector, playing at respectability. Miles stiffened, turning to face Dr. Maxwell, who stood at the edge of the dance floor, his expression contemptuous. Despite the festive atmosphere, the doctor was dressed in his usual formal suit, as if making a point about his professional status. "This isn't the place, Maxwell," Miles warned quietly. Maxwell ignored him, his gaze fixed on Hope. "I've been making inquiries about you, Miss Blackburn. Or should I say, Miss Harlow? That was your name in Billings, wasn't it?" Hope felt the blood drain from her face. How had he discovered her real name? Her past? Maxwell smiled coldly, seeing the confirmation in her expression. "Yes, I thought so. Daughter of botanist Edward Harlow and his wife. Stepdaughter to Billings businessman George Wingate." His voice carried, drawing the attention of nearby dancers. "Presumed dead in a house fire. A fire that also severely injured her stepbrother Thomas Wingate." Miles moved slightly, positioning himself between Hope and Maxwell. "I said this isn't the place. The people of Silver Creek deserve to know who's been dispensing medicine to them," Maxwell pressed. "A young woman who fled justice, who let her family believe she was dead. That's enough." Miles's voice cut through the growing murmurs of the crowd. Hope placed a trembling hand on his arm. "No, Miles. Let him speak. I have nothing to hide." She faced Maxwell, drawing strength from Miles's presence beside her. "Yes, my name was Hope Harlow. Yes, I fled my stepfather's house after defending myself against his son's unwanted advances. And yes, I allowed them to believe I perished in a fire I did not start." Her voice grew stronger. "I came west to escape men who would control me, who would force me into a marriage I did not want, who would destroy the knowledge my mother and father spent their lives collecting." She looked around at the gathered faces, some confused, some concerned, a few hostile. "Everything I've done at Elkhorn Ranch has been to help this community, to share the healing knowledge my parents began teaching me as a child. I've hidden my past, but never my intentions." Maxwell's face flushed with anger. "A convenient story. But I've written to the authorities in Billings. They'll be very interested to learn you're alive and well, and that you've built quite a nice life for yourself after abandoning your family to grief." "You've done what?" Miles stepped forward, his hand dropping to his pistol. The sheriff emerged from the crowd, his expression grave. "Let's all calm down. This is supposed to be a celebration." "There's nothing to celebrate about harboring a fugitive, Sheriff," Maxwell insisted. "I'm not a fugitive," Hope said firmly. "I broke no laws by leaving my stepfather's house. I was of legal age. The fire was an accident, one I had nothing to do with. There are no charges against me." "That remains to be seen," Maxwell countered. "But I think your patients might reconsider putting their trust in someone who'd deceive her own family so thoroughly." Hope felt a wave of despair as she looked at the confused, uncertain faces around her. All her work, all the trust she'd built, would it crumble under the weight of Maxwell's accusations? Then Emma Henderson pushed through the crowd, running to Hope's side and taking her hand. "Miss Hope saved me," she announced in her clear child's voice. "When I was so sick I couldn't breathe. She came through the big storm and made me better." Jim Henderson stepped forward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "That's right. And she's helped half the people here, asking nothing in return except what we could spare." He looked around at his neighbors. "I don't care what her name was before. I care what she's done since she came here." One by one, others stepped forward. The young mother whose baby had been safely delivered, The rancher whose infected hand had been saved from amputation, the elderly woman whose arthritis had been eased by Hope's preparations. She helped my Jacob when that fever was going through last winter, one woman called out. When Maxwell said there was nothing to be done but wait. Saved my best mare when she was colicking, a farmer added. No one else could have gotten there in time. Maxwell's face contorted with fury. This is absurd. You're choosing folk remedies and superstition over proper medical science? Over the law. What law has she broken, Doctor? Sheriff Collins asked quietly. Leaving a bad situation? Changing her name? Last I checked, neither was illegal in Montana territory. Maxwell sputtered, but the tide had turned against him. The community of Silver Creek, with its frontier pragmatism, valued results over background, healing over credentials. Miles took Hope's hand, squeezing it gently. I think we're done here, he said, his voice carrying. Unless you have actual charges to bring, Sheriff? Collins shook his head. None that I can see, Porter. Though I'd appreciate clarity on the situation from Billings when it comes. You'll have it, Hope promised. I'll write to the authorities myself, explaining everything. As the crowd began to disperse, the musicians tentatively resumed playing. Maxwell stood alone, his victory turned to humiliation, while Hope found herself surrounded by supporters, people who had experienced her healing firsthand and would not be swayed by revelations about her past. When they finally had a moment alone, Miles led Hope to a quiet spot beneath a tree strung with lanterns. His expression was serious as he studied her face. You should have told me, he said quietly. About your real name. About the fire. I know, she admitted. At first, I was afraid to trust anyone with the truth. Then, as we grew closer, I was afraid of losing your trust. She looked down at their still joined hands. I'm sorry, Miles. He lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. I understand why you kept it secret. But no more secrets between us, Hope. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together, she whispered, hardly daring to hope at what his words implied. Miles's eyes softened. I've spent 7 years running from attachment, from putting down roots. Telling myself the frontier was no place for love, that caring too much only led to loss. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But watching you these past weeks, your courage, your compassion, the way you give of yourself without hesitation, I've realized how wrong I was. Hope's heart pounded as he continued, his voice dropping lower. The frontier isn't just about survival, Hope. It's about building something worth surviving for. A home. A purpose. His hand cupped her cheek. A love that makes the hardships worthwhile. Miles, she breathed, her voice catching. I love you, Hope Harlow Blackburn, whatever name you choose to carry. I love your gentle hands and your brave heart. I love the way you care for others without thought for yourself. His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet certain. And if you'll have me, I want to spend my life building something with you at Elkhorn Ranch. Tears sprang to Hope's eyes as joy welled up within her. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that night in the storm, when you risked everything to help me save Emma. When I saw that beneath your caution was a man of incredible courage and compassion. Miles smiled, drawing her closer. So what do you say, Hope? Will you help me make Elkhorn into what it was meant to be? A place of healing, of growth, our home. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes to all of it. As Miles lowered his head to kiss her beneath the lantern light, Hope felt the last pieces of her broken past falling away. She had fled west seeking safety, seeking escape. Instead, she had found purpose, community, and now, in Miles's arms, she had found a love strong enough to weather any storm the frontier might bring. Autumn painted the hills surrounding Elkhorn Ranch in golds and reds as Miles stood on the newly repaired porch, watching the approach of a single rider. Sheriff Collins, his expression unreadable as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. Sheriff, Miles greeted him, tension coiling in his stomach. It had been 2 months since the summer social. 2 months of waiting for word from Billings regarding Hope's past. 2 months of happiness shadowed by uncertainty. Porter, Collins nodded, removing his hat. Is Miss Blackburn around? She's in the garden, Miles replied. I'll get her. No need to disturb her if she's working, Collins said, surprising Miles. What I have to say concerns you both, but I can tell you first. Miles braced himself. Is it news from Billings? Collins nodded. Got a reply yesterday to Hope's letter explaining the situation. He reached into his coat, withdrawing an official-looking document. Statement from the Billings sheriff confirms her story. There was never any investigation into the fire. It was ruled accidental from the start. No charges were ever filed. No suspicion attached to Hope. Relief washed through Miles. And her stepfather? His son. Both alive and well, according to the sheriff. The son was injured in the fire, but recovered. They settled her mother's estate long ago, believing Hope had perished. Collins handed over the document. There's more. The Billings sheriff included a letter from Hope's mother's sister, an aunt Hope apparently didn't know was looking for her. She provided additional confirmation of Hope's account of her stepbrother's unwanted attentions. Miles took the papers, scanning them quickly. Have you shown these to Maxwell? Collins's mouth twisted. I have. He wasn't pleased to have his accusations disproven so thoroughly, especially since he'd already written to the medical board in Helena, trying to have your operation here investigated. And now he looks like a fool, Collins said bluntly. A respected doctor pursuing a vendetta against a young woman whose only crime was helping people he couldn't, or wouldn't. He settled his hat back on his head. Between you and me, Porter, I don't think Maxwell will be troubling you much anymore. His reputation's taken quite a hit. As the sheriff rode away, Miles hurried to the garden barn, where Hope was carefully harvesting late-blooming echinacea. She looked up at his entrance, her face lighting with a smile that still took his breath away. Miles? What is it? He held up the documents, his heart full. It's over, Hope. Collins brought word from Billings. Everything you told me was confirmed. No charges, no suspicion. You're free. Hope's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Miles crossed to her, pulling her into his arms as she trembled with relief. I'm free, she whispered against his chest. Truly free. Miles held her close, breathing in the scent of herbs that clung to her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his. You know what this means, don't you? He asked softly. She looked up, wiping away tears. What? It means nothing stands in the way of what I've been wanting to ask you. He took her soil-stained hands in his. Hope Harlow, will you marry me? Make this ranch truly ours. Build a life together that combines your healing garden and my ranching. Joy bloomed across her face like the first flowers of spring. Yes, Miles Porter. 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was sweet with promise, with the certainty that what had begun as an unexpected inheritance had transformed into something far more valuable, a love that had healed them both, a purpose that would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the mountains frosted white and the valley ablaze with autumn color. The entire community of Silver Creek gathered at Elkhorn Ranch, the same people who had stood by Hope during Maxwell's accusations now bearing witness to her happiness. Hope wore a simple white dress with sprigs of dried lavender and rosemary in her bouquet. Healing herbs for a healing love. Miles waited for her beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, his eyes never leaving her as she walked toward him on Jim Henderson's arm, little Emma scattering flower petals in her path. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and support each other through the hardships of frontier life, to build something lasting together, to use their combined knowledge to help those in need. From the moment you challenged my belief that the frontier was no place for love, Miles said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You began healing a part of me I thought was broken beyond repair. You taught me that roots aren't chains. They're anchors that give us strength to weather any storm. Hope's voice trembled as she replied, When I fled my past, I sought only safety. In you, I found not just protection, but understanding, partnership, a love that sees me completely and cherishes all that I am. With you, I'm not running from something, but towards something, a future we'll build together. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Even Sheriff Collins removed his hat in respect, though Dr. Maxwell was notably absent. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing in the yard, tables laden with food contributed by grateful neighbors, and children playing among the garden beds that now expanded beyond the barn, growing in the sunshine rather than in secrecy. When the last guests had departed, Miles led Hope to the porch of their home, where they stood looking out over the ranch that had brought them together. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pasture. The newly completed stable housed the promising foals from their breeding program, and the expanded garden flourished under Hope's careful tending. Not bad for a drifter who inherited a mysterious ranch, Miles said, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Hope leaned against him, contentment radiating from her, and the beautiful secret within its walls. Miles smiled, turning to face her fully. The most beautiful secret of all, he agreed, drawing her into his arms. A woman brave enough to build a new life, wise enough to preserve ancient healing knowledge, and loving enough to teach a cautious cowboy that putting down roots was the greatest adventure of all. As the stars appeared above Elkhorn Ranch, Miles and Hope Porter stood on the threshold of their shared future, their separate paths now joined into one. A journey of healing, growth, and love that would flourish in the fertile soil of the home they'd created together, sheltered by the walls that had once held secrets but now contained only the promise of tomorrow.